This being Memorial Day, it's a time when we remember those who fought, especially those who died in battle defending our freedom. I want to reflect this morning upon a monument that God had erected, had the people erect, so that the generations to come would be able to remember His intervention and bring them into the freedom of the promised land. Israel got the slides out. Israel had been in the wilderness for 40 years. The Israelites were in slavery in Egypt, and God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that He would give their descendants a land that we now call Israel. Due to a famine, they ended up in Egypt, but in time, they were enslaved by the Egyptians. So God raised up Moses and delivered them, to deliver them out of Egyptian bondage. And they went into the wilderness on their journey to freedom. Let me comment something right there. We don't realize, but freedom and achieving freedom is about a journey. And just as the Israelites crossed the Red Sea into the wilderness, there were lessons that needed to be learned along the line about freedom and what was going to happen. And as God led them out of Egyptian bondage and into their journey of freedom, they learned some things. So one of the things they learned was that freedom is an inalienable right given by God to every human being. They learned that in the Lord. That's a freedom they learned. Another thing they learned that while freedom is a God-given right, it has to be won at a hard cost and defended at all costs. Third thing they learned about freedom in their journey. They learned that liberty is the right to live within the boundaries of the Ten Commandments. It is not licensed to do whatever we want or think, but it is lived within the boundaries of the Ten Commandments. And finally, they learned that the consequences of breaking the commandments would lead to loss of blessing, hardship, and eventually the loss of freedom. They've learned these lessons. They are now on the bank of the Jordan, getting ready to enter into Canaan land. And as they are there, we begin to read this. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, they crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up the stone." I'm having a hard time keeping on track here. What happened was, as they got to the Jordan, God sent the priest through ahead of time. He backed up the river. The nation went through. And then he makes this command about taking up 12 stones. And he says this. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and to carry them over with you and put them down again at the place where you stayed overnight." So Joshua called 12 men he appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord, go into the middle of Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. And in your future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant. And when they crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So we have that pile of stones that is specifically intended to make the next generation ask questions. One of the things that God does is He does things for us to remember. I want you to think about that monument for just a little bit. I talked to you about 4 lessons that they learned in the wilderness, what they learned about freedom. And so here they are when they have finally arrived in their land, their place, their promised land, where they would be a free people. God has them erect a monument and say, you, when your children come by, ask them, and they ask you, what do these stones mean? You tell them, well, God backed up the Jordan and let His people go free. One of the things they were doing is building a legacy. They were transferring from one generation to the next what had been given them. I'll never forget, one of the blessings that I had when I was in the Army is to be able to travel a lot throughout Germany. And one of the places that I loved was the cathedral at Cologne. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever had the opportunity to visit a cathedral, but they are huge. They're immense. The cathedral at Cologne has 2 spires that go well over 200 feet in the air, and the work and whatever. It's also Gothic construction, meaning you can see the flying buttresses, the gargoyles, the beautiful stained glass windows. All of these things were there. It took them 200 years to build that cathedral. And there's a big plaza around the cathedral. And it was a beautiful Sunday morning, about like this morning. It was cool, sunny, and beautiful. And I was standing in that plaza and I was looking at it. And I asked myself the question, why would anybody, any people, want to spend 200 years building something? And it became apparent to me that what they wanted to do was they wanted something permanent to show each generation just how much they loved God and just what God meant to them and to their nation and to their town. And they were willing to build monuments. So we build monuments today. God had the Israelites construct a monument for the express purpose of creating a teaching moment to pass on great truths to the next generation. Here in America, we are founded upon the principle that we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We had to win those rights in the Revolutionary War. Since then, we have had to fight wars with nations and people who would take those rights from us. We have monuments around our country to remind us of God's gift of freedom and what it costs to get it and what it costs to keep it. And so I would ask you this morning, what do these stones mean? They mean that the cause of freedom, this, for those of you I think all realize, it's the tomb of the unknowns. These stones mean that the cause of freedom is more important than any individual. And that while the name of the individual who participated in the defense of our freedom may be lost, the cause for which they died is bigger than any person. It's not the name, it's the cause. Or how about this stone? I just pulled out one of the national cemeteries. What do these headstones mean? These headstones mean that freedom is not free. It's something that we have to strive and to hold and to fight for. What do these stones mean? This is the wall, Vietnam Memorial. 53,000 names on it. These stones mean that wars must be fought to win. While we must love our enemy does not love us. And when we choose to limit the amount and type of force we will use to subdue our enemy, they will see it only as weakness and use it against us. With the exception of the Civil War, all of the wars we have fought are against external enemies. They were external and they were easily identifiable. Our generation, however, what we are facing now is internal enemies who are destroying the foundation of our nation and taking our freedoms from us. How are they destroying our nation? They're destroying our families. Understand that. The moves that are being made, things that are being forced on us, is the destruction of the family. You see, it's the American family, it's home, where the love of freedom is taught. It's home where the Ten Commandments that are the basis of our entire legal system, that's where they are taught and enforced and brought to the areas where the kids can understand. It's in the home where the love of country and where those things are taught. That's where it is. So the moves we find in many areas. The whole intent is to destroy the American family. Since beginning in the 1960s, we have seen the American family in decline, and seeing the American family in decline, we have seen poverty increase, we've seen crime on the rise. You destroy the family, you destroy the nation. They're taking our freedom of religion. I just use this as one example. There are actually several of them. But it's getting harder and harder to exercise our religion. For example, it's terrible, isn't it, that towns want to have a cross in their public parks. Isn't that awful? Now I'll tell you why they don't want that cross there. They claim it's because it's not showing other religions. The reason why they don't want that cross there is because the children will ask, what do those stones mean? And we tell them, because all of us have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and that Jesus Christ came, was born of a virgin, lived, hung on a cross, died, and rose again, so that we could be cleansed from our sin and be saved.
Amen.
That's what those stones mean. But the fight, if you take a look at what's going on in our nation, is honestly a fight between religion and irreligion. The mockery that goes on, Christianity, in the late night TV shows, why is it they never mock the Muslims? I'll tell you why. Afraid some Muslims show up on stage and cut off their head. I'm only being half funny. My point is that we now have, in the name of civil rights, business people are being forced. For instance, there before the Supreme Court right now is a case where a baker, a gay couple wanted them to come and make them a wedding cake, and they simply said to them, listen, our conscience won't let us do that, and here's the name of another baker, they will do it, but we just simply can't. It was a conscience matter. It's gone clear to the Supreme Court. They're trying to take their business away from them. That's right. Since when did we lose freedom of conscience?
That's right.
But that's the war that's going on right now.
Right.
They're trying to enslave us with debt. Do you realize since the Second World War we have become a debtor nation? Do you realize that we, as consumers, get tied up in debt? You know what the Bible says about debt? The Bible says that the debtor is servant to the lender. Right? The borrower is servant to the lender. Stop and think about it. Bank tells you when to get up, when to go to work, what to do, whatever. Yeah.
Slave.
Now, I simply call this to our attention, to realize that we are in a struggle for freedom. And that what we have is here. And a lot of it, we take a look at it, and it looks impossible. It seems that the forces of the powers of the institutions and whatever against it, be it government, be it business, be it education, whatever, they're against us, and it looks impossible. But I told you a story to start this thing off. And this is why I wanted to look at the 11th Psalm. David starts off and he says, "In the Lord I take my refuge." That's an assertion. Now I want to ask you, how can you say to me, "Flee like a bird to your mountain, for the wicked, look at for the wicked bend their bows and they set their arrows and they shoot at you in secret"? The answer is, yep. You can see it going on all around us. They shoot from the shadows at the upright heart. And then they make this statement, when the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? Okay? That's what you're saying. And David says this, and that's what I want us to get. The Lord's in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne. He observes the sons of man His eyes examine them. The Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked and those who love violence His soul hates. On the wicked He will rain fiery coals, burning sulfur, scorching wind will be their lot. But the Lord's righteous, He loves justice, upright men will see His face. You see, our story was that Israel was confronted with an impossible obstacle. And God miraculously provided a way so that they could go into their country and they could have their land flowing with milk and honey and live in peace and freedom. And so, brothers and sisters in Christ, on this Memorial Day, when we look at the situation, and we may be tempted to despair, remember that God makes a way where there is no way.
That's right.
And on this Memorial Day, let us remember those who have paid, that all of them have given some. Some gave all. But we will strive to continue, with God's help, that we will have our freedom. Amen. Heavenly Father, I've done my best to give what you asked me to give. I know it's been broken. Lord, as we come before you, won't you please be with us as a congregation and as a nation, that we're not going to look at the situation that's around us, but realize that you are the God who will take us through the flooded river. In Jesus' name. Amen. Let us stand.